here's the deal. One thing that I want you to keep in mind for anybody who is here, who's struggling with addictions, who's struggling with suffering from mental health issues, and their loved ones and families, there is no magic formula. There's no magic key that we can turn or some key that we can give you that will solve all of the problems. It's a journey. It's a journey, and we recognize that. And that's why for some churches it's a little hard to walk through that, because it is a journey. It's not a one and done thing. But we want to make the journey with you. And we want to provide a safe space for you to deal with the messes in your life, deal with the things that you're struggling with in your life, with that group and with all of our other Connect groups as people come together and are in community and talk through things. It's amazing what God can do in the midst of that. I was talking with one former addict the other day, and one of the things that he said is what the enemy does when you're suffering from mental health issues and when you're suffering from addiction issues, really when you're suffering from any sin, what the enemy tries to do is to isolate you, to keep you away from other people. Because in God's infinite wisdom and sovereignty, he says, I want a lot of the healing to happen through the community of believers that I have put together. And so what the enemy does is he tries to isolate people. And as one of them said, isolation kills. And so if you're struggling, or you're a family member whose loved one is struggling with addiction or dealing with mental health issues in their life, and you need some community of people to be around you to help walk you through that process, we want to give you that opportunity. And so we really encourage you to check out the group that's meeting on Tuesday nights. It's going to be in the room just on the other side of this wall right here. So we encourage you to check that out. Now, the danger in talking about addictions is that we get bogged down in the muck and the mire of the pain and the chaos. And that's not what this is about. If all we do is talk about the pain here, then you're going to leave this place going, well, that was awful for them, and now I feel really bad, and I just want to go to a buffet and eat myself into oblivion. That's not what we want to do. We want to give hope, because the reality is there is a way out of the chaos. You don't have to be in the chaos anymore. There is a way out. And it's a journey, and it's hard and painful at times, but there is a way out. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And so I'm going to invite a friend of ours up to the platform. Some of you may know him. And then afterwards, we're just going to give some key points to maybe help resource you a little bit better. A lot of people here may know you, but there are some that don't. So if you would just briefly kind of introduce yourself to them, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Just quick history. Me and my family and siblings have gone to Hermantown Church for most of my life, definitely the majority of my life. We started coming to Hermantown Church when it was meeting at Cinema 8, which was like day one almost, and then, of course, the church across the street, and this church here. A large backdrop in my life for the fabric of where I come from would be Sunday school, and helping in Sunday school, and youth group was huge in my life. Like I've said, the majority of my real friends that I would consider people that I still converse with and hang out with today would be those that were in my youth group, not those that were necessarily like at my school or anything.
Right. So big portion of your life was in the context of being in the church, which is really important that people struggling with this. It's not just the people out there, folks. It's people in the family that are struggling too. We can't forget that. So we have the backdrop of the church. In that backdrop, can you just share with us a little bit about when and how the substance abuse began?
So I guess I would say I started experimenting with it probably between 16 and 18, 16 years old, you get your license and you get some abilities to move around and drive around and hang out with people without necessary supervision and whatnot. So I had a girlfriend at the time, and I was spending a lot of time at her house down in Duluth. And her parents were nice and everything too, but they weren't always, keeping tabs on us or anything. So we started experimenting, sneaking some vodka out of their cupboard and kind of seeing what that was like, or a beer here and there. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are like, why do people get into addiction? Why do they decide to do this stupid stuff? And really, like I've said, it's fun. At the time, it's fun. It's socially fun. A young person such as myself wouldn't necessarily identify, oh, I'm an addictive personality. Nobody knows that. So you're hanging out and you're doing what your friends do, and it's a good time. It's a good time for quite a while. It evolves into worse things if you have these tendencies, though.
Yeah. And so with that, share with us a little bit of the journey so you start off with the alcohol and stuff, but things get progressively worse. So tell us about that entire journey as things get progressively worse and what God did to kind of bring you to an end of all of that. So just tell us that whole story.
Yeah, so I moved out after high school, after graduating. I went up to Virginia to go to college and moved in with that girlfriend. And, then we really didn't have any supervision at all. First year of college, did all right, went to class all the time, and then kind of partied on the weekends, as a lot of people do when they go to college. So it just seemed like the norm, especially on the range. Sorry. So we'd hang out and we'd do that, and then summer came and there was no school, and then I started working more for the summer, but there wasn't really like this, I didn't have to be at school at 8 a.m., so I started kind of drinking more on the weekdays too. And at that time it was all in the name of, hey, this feels good, and it's enjoyable, or it was at the time.
Yeah.
That relationship pretty much unraveled, and we weren't seeing eye to eye like we were before, so that totally fell apart. And she left after a few things, and then I was just kind of up there on my own, and was drinking a lot. Like, it progressed to every other day or every day or something like that. So I finished out up there. I totally failed at everything and moved back to Duluth. Personally, I can identify that I'm somebody who wants to feel accepted or feel like people want me around socially and stuff. And so I got back here, and I kind of just hooked up with some other people that I could drink with, and started seeing another girl who was a very, I would say, bad influence on me. And she was more knowledgeable about some harder addictions, and so I was introduced to cocaine and heroin and meth, and was doing those here and there, and then that just started to progress and evolve and become more of my life. And so after about 4 or 5 years of that, I was all the way to the point where I was shooting up with syringes, and you become a creature who is trying to a shame-based creature. When you're not high or drunk anymore, then you feel pain and loneliness, and you don't want to feel that anymore, so then you just want to obliterate that feeling and go and find what you can to get rid of that.
Okay. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad are praying.
Yes, prayer warriors.
But you said something, as we were talking last night, you said something very interesting, and I thought it was so great. But through that process, God repeatedly, as he would give you a chance. Talk a little bit about that. I don't want to steal the thunder because it's such a that's such a great journey on God's involvement even in the midst of your mess there. Would you talk a little bit about that?
If I take what you're meaning, I've kind of looked at my life, and God would take away some privilege for a while, and he would, continually he would give me another chance. He would take away my privileges or my freedom in certain senses for a little bit longer, and then I would make it back out into society, so to say. And, I might do well for a little bit, and then I might fail again with the privilege that he would give me, or the responsibility that he would give me. And then he would take my freedom away a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. And what I mean there is, at first, when somebody's first identifying that they're having addiction problems, you would usually get recommended for like a 28-day treatment or something like that. So it progressed from 28 days to 60 days, 60 days a few times. And then I did go to a Teen Challenge here in Duluth, pretty much right when it opened. It was a little bit more of a Wild West then, probably. And that was very good. I absolutely appreciate in my life the things, the knowledge, and the people that I met at Teen Challenge. I got out after 13 or 14 months, and I got a job, and I did fairly well for about a year or so. And like I touched on yesterday, one problem at that time was I don't think there was much of an aftercare, so you were kind of cut to the wind. And a lot of the big relationships that I'd built in Teen Challenge, well then, they're from all over North Minnesota, so suddenly, they're gone. They went to Bemidji and all their hometowns, and they weren't really around anymore, so I was just kind of working, but still feeling a little lonely on my own. I ended up falling back into drinking after like a year. As, I hung out with a few people that I knew drank and stuff, hung out sober a few times, but then I just wanted to have a good time with them and kind of feel like we were on the same wavelength, so I drank again. And so I ended up, staying at a few places, and then back to my parents' house, which can be a recurring thing in an addict's life who is, messing up their situations over and over. This comes to a head when I was staying there, and I had gotten some alcohol and brought it out there. And a few times I had stayed up and drank after my parents went to bed and stuff, kind of slipping it by them. And so I just had a small bottle, and I felt a buzz for a while, and then I ran out, and some sort of rationalization, and this is kind of out in the woods, in some sort of rationalization, I came to the idea that there's a lot of hunting and fishing shacks out here, and people probably keep some alcohol in them. And so I went off down the dirt road and went looking for a shack where I could maybe find some liquor. And I let myself in. I broke into a place that looked like a hunting shack or something, and I was looking around for some beer. And then I heard somebody say, "What the heck are you doing?" Behind me. And I didn't even look. I just ran off. I was frightened, obviously. Probably not as frightened as them, though.
Yeah.
I ran off. I went back to my parents' house, and I had locked myself out somehow. And so a short while later, I saw sirens and flashers go by. And so I got very frightened, and I ran off in some trail down the woods. They tracked me down with a dog and arrested me, brought me to jail. I had been in jail a few times before this for like DWIs and things, by the way. We can't cover my whole story today. I'm sorry that we'd be here all day.
That's fine.
I was in jail for a few days, and a detective came in to question me, and he dropped a large bomb on me. He said, "The man whose house you broke into had a heart attack that night and died." And I know that we're here to talk about a lot today, and so I don't want to hurry past this part of the story because it's just, very heavy in my heart. An addict, as they do their day-to-day things that they need to do, have no conception or thought as to how they're affecting others, because it's a very selfish situation. And so the spirit of evil that has hold of them and had hold of me is obviously all of our enemy. Yeah. And we can't let the addict off the hook, but the person that you love is still in there. And the Lord can set them free. So obviously I'm very remorseful for much collateral damage in my life. So this brought me to so I had to plead in a certain manner in court to avoid involuntary manslaughter charges, and they gave me an upward departure on first-degree burglary. I went to prison for 4 years. That summer was 2008. That was the last time that I've drank or used. It doesn't have to, and it shouldn't have to take such heavy event to help somebody. But really, in my life, when you look back, as many of you I'm sure can, you can look behind you and you can see a masterpiece orchestra being directed and woven by a creator, placing things in your path and arranging things for you that you have no idea about. So I spent I spent a year in a commercial prison in Appleton that is kind of like Minnesota was farming inmates out there. Yep. And it was one of those prisons that's like done for money, so they like scrimp on everything, and it's kind of a gulag situation. And so things were really rough there for a year, and everybody's in there trying to be the tougher guy or whoever, and that prison shut down, and I was transferred over to Lino Lakes. And when I landed in Lino Lakes, the normal lockdown unit that you're supposed to land in while they sort you out was full. And so they put me on overflow in a different unit, which is called K3. And the K3 unit is where they house all of the inmates who have decided to volunteer to be put into Chuck Colson's prison ministry. And it's called Interchange Freedom Initiative.
Yep.
And so I got there, and everybody seemed pretty nice suddenly, which was really strange. And they're asking you, do you need this or do you need that? What can I do for you? All the other inmates. And the guards seemed nice too. And up until that point, everything was, if somebody's asking you if you need a favor or something like that, you'd want to say no because for some reason, somehow they'd use that to their advantage in the future. And so I was there for a while, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, I don't remember. And there was just something different in that unit. It was a different look in people's eyes and a more spiritually heightened something in the air, And so I got transferred out of there and was put back to a unit that was very cold and cement and whatnot. And immediately I could feel that spiritual familiarity was again gone. And so I put in an application to get in that program and to get back there because I could feel, as you can feel in this community building here, a spiritual home, a familiarity of the Lord, So I went into that program, and that is a very intense 18-month program where there's Bible classes and scripture reading, and you got to be at 6 a.m. and read your Bible every morning, and they check on you and all this very regimented biblical teaching, healing. But one of the things that I found in there that was very essential for me, of course, all people with addictions will come to the Lord to know him and to be healed in different manners. But, the Lord just arranged this for me where there was counselors in there and people who were very rough on you spiritually, because it takes some people, for addicts, it can sometimes take something to really get your attention. And so what I've found in my life and in my problems is I need somebody to be rough on me. I need that coach who says, you're just not doing it good enough,
Right.
You need to go out and do better, instead of somebody who is gentle, which, that's essential too. Some people aren't rough and you're very good at prayer or something, and keep that up, do it. But some people are good at brass tacks, and that's really what it took for me. We had some counselors who were like, start that story over again and explain it in a way that does not alleviate you from all of the foul things that you did. Yeah. And so I grew immensely in that program and came a long way at identifying in myself the places where I was letting myself off the hook, as well as building my own personality and figuring out who I am. Because a lot of my addiction and a lot of my journey, as I look back, I would know that I had no idea who I was. I was trying to be something for other people or trying to hang out with people instead of having a self and knowing who I am and that I can choose for myself what I want to do, not what, the crowd wants to do.
So there are then, through Chuck Colson's ministry in the prison there, and through other things that you've learned, there are some principles and disciplines that you've had to place in your life to give you the best possible chance of not falling back into the life that you lived. Would you share just a few of those that might help some people out here as they walk through their journey?
So there are many of those. Some that we talked about that kind of stick out to me is there was a lesson that was beaten into us in these classes that I enjoy now. And that is that I had trained myself my entire life to go with my first thought on choosing a shortcut or whatnot. Well, the lesson is you should search for your second or third right thought, the right thought. Whereas the first thought I had trained myself my entire life might be the easiest or the one I might enjoy, and I would usually go with that. And that's in all situations in life. And this is to protect me. I need to choose the second right thought. If I go to McDonald's and I order a meal and it gets rung up at $2, my first thought might be, here's my card. But my second right thought, my honest thought, that I needed to retrain myself to choose would be, I think you rang that up wrong. That should be like $5 or $6. And so it's training, it's practice, you gotta reevaluate yourself all the time to figure out what the right answer is, what the honest answer is. Because I trained myself my entire life to choose the feel-good first answer. That's what I want to do. That'll feel good, I'll enjoy that, I'll figure out the consequences later. But in every situation, in every question, in every temptation, I now have to stop, figure out what is not the shortcut, and protect myself by choosing the honest thing, even on small stuff. And that will protect me. Another tool that I have has taken a lifetime to learn would be, as I look back in my history, I finally thought to myself, looking at all the poor decisions that I'd made that got me into being locked up or suffering, major suffering through all my journey. What would have happened if I had either A, listened to my parents, or B, asked them what they thought, and then listened? And so, when I got out, I made a decision that, well, at first it was a lot. But, now it's definitely with major decisions. But I go to my parents. Throughout my entire life, they had tried to direct me in the right ways. And I could have saved myself so much suffering, as well as other people, if I had only listened to some reason. I had, as being younger, I decided, I was gonna figure this out myself and make my own decisions and be independent and all that. And now I'm 36 years old, and I definitely ask my parents when I'm about to make a large decision in my life. But when I got out, it was a lot of different things, telling them about where I was going to church, or this person did this thing that made me mad, what should I do, those type of things. So I like to go back to my parents, and they help protect myself as well.
Yeah. So just those are a couple of things that you've placed in your life to kind of help guard against falling back into the life that, as you said before, was a shame-based kind of existence. But as you've placed those disciplines in your life and you've recentered your life on Christ, what's life like now? What's it feel like now?
So life now is, I mean, it still has trials, of course, but it's really great. It's a life I can be very proud of. In a span of 6 years, I went from bad credit and owing money to my credit score is wonderful. I met my lovely wife. We got married. We've bought a house. We have 2 pretty great cars, kids, a new baby. God has done this orchestration thing again where I went from working for somebody to now I have a couple companies of my own. They are prospering and doing well. I don't know, I get to do fun stuff. The companies I built have allowed me to buy fun stuff for my family. I don't know, it's just, I can't explain it all, but it's a dream. It's a dream in a very short span of time, and it's amazing. And all you got to do, I mean, it's not this easy, but all you got to do is decide to do the right thing. Oh, my goodness. And I know that we would, the hard thing is you look at your loved one who's addicted, and it, on the outside, or in hindsight, it seems like that. Oh, all you got to do is the right thing, and it's not that easy when you're in it. It really isn't. And I didn't mention this yesterday, but if somebody wants to imagine how it is to feel addicted to something, so we all know that our body needs food. And when we don't eat most of a day, we feel this physical hunger that says, feed me. Go somewhere and get some food and feed me.
Right.
That's almost the only thing I can liken it to. It's another substance besides food where you get to the point where when you don't have it for a portion of a day, your body says, feed me. And so imagine not eating for a day or two and then saying, I'm going to quit this eating thing. And the hunger for it gets so overpowering and difficult, your body says, feed me. And so when an addict says, I'm going to stay off it this time, I'm not going to do it anymore, you know, they get a day or two out and they go and screw up again. Why do they do that? Because it's pretty much exactly like the body saying, get me a cheeseburger. You haven't eaten in 2 days.
Yeah.
It's super difficult not to eat forever.
Yep. Well, we've talked about your journey. We've talked about what God has done and what He's brought your life to, and the freedoms that you have. It's amazing to me as you were talking about how He would take a bit of your freedoms away as you would mess up. But as you've decided to follow and stick to it and stuff like that, a lot of the freedoms have been given back, and you're enjoying those now. But is there anything else that you'd like to say to us, those that are either struggling with addiction, those family members whose loved ones are struggling, or us as a church where we can create a space that and an opportunity to help those that are going through this?
So like I mentioned yesterday, I think a big thing in a recovering person's life can be a mentor. And that mentor could be one of two things. It could be somebody who's never had addiction problems. That doesn't exclude you from being a mentor. But somebody, an addict or a person who's trying to get out of their muck, can see somebody, a Christian man or woman, preferably the same gender, they can see that person as a role model or somebody they can identify with. They might jump right to the conclusion, you don't know what you're talking about, you haven't been through what I've been through. But it would be pretty easy if the addict can get past that part to see this person as someone to look up to, or that at least has Christian wisdom and knowledge that they can take a scoop of. And then the other one would be somebody who has been through it, which, I mean, the implications there are obvious, that they can see that person as somebody who made it out and that it's possible. One thing, I guess, if anybody's, gonna mentor somebody or try and help them out with some wisdom, just be there for them. And don't sign up to do that if you got a busy schedule and you're going to be canceling.
Yep.
Because that would be an easy reason for an addict to brush you off.
Yep.
Well, he's not even, he keeps canceling.
Yeah.
This guy's a joke.
Yeah. Well, a lot for us to think about. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And will you be available for a little bit if people want to come up and talk with you after the service and stuff? We're going to have some time of prayer here in a few minutes and stuff. But would you just thank him for sharing his story with us today? The reality is the journey isn't easy. There are daily disciplines. I think Paul puts it perfectly in 1 Corinthians when he says this. In chapter 9, he says, "Don't you realize that in a race everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win." All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with a purpose in every step. I'm not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. The reality is, the process to get from what our selfish desires want to do to the place that we are submitted to righteousness in our life is a journey. It's a journey for those of us that don't deal with addictive tendencies. It's a journey for those of us that don't deal with the chemical addictive properties of some people's sin. But the reality is that for every single one of us, because we all have a propensity to sin in some area, but for some people, it's a little bit more visible. And for some people, the addictive properties, the chemical properties of the thing that they're indulging in, which, by the way, is just the outflow of the sin. It's not the sin itself, but it's the outflow of the sinfulness that each one of us have in our own bodies. And for those of us that might say, well, if they were just strong enough, if they just kind of need to make a decision and help themselves, the reality is none of us were able to help ourselves. Jesus Christ had to go to the cross and die to get us out of our self-centeredness. Do we realize that? That the addict who can't seem to shake the outflow of their sin is no different than any person who can't seem to shake the outflow of theirs. The self-centeredness, the gossip, the egotism, the pride, the lying. Sin manifests itself in different ways, and yet a lot of times we place this stigma on people who are dealing with addictions as if they're somehow weaker than the rest of us who didn't have the power to control ourselves either. And so we want to create a safe space for people to be able to share their mess with us so that we can help walk them through the process. But it's a discipline. It's hard work, and that's why Paul puts it this way. We have to discipline ourselves. That's not an easy task. It's not simple. It's hard. But there is hope. We have so many people in our congregation that are evident of that. And sometimes it takes 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 times to fall before you say, you know what, God, I can't do this anymore. And you allow him to work that in you. But as we close today, I want to give us some tools. None of these are magic keys. But there's some tools that we can put in our life that can help us in our journey from old sinful nature, the selfish nature in us to the person that God wants us to be. We're all on that journey. And for those of you that are struggling with addictions, I just want to let you know, you're no worse than I am. You're not a worse person than I am. You struggle. You struggle. But I want you to know, I'm not any better than you. And for those of you that have family members that are struggling, I want you to understand that their propensity to sin is not worse than yours. Have patience with them. Have compassion on them. At times, get down to brass tacks. At times, let them know what it's like. Let them know what they need to hear. Because that's what we have to do sometimes as loved ones. But let's not think that we're any better. Please. We all have our journeys. And we all need to come around each other and support one another. And that's one of the principles that we need to understand, that community is important. Isolation kills. Community is important. Jesus says that Jesus talks about the fact that we need to restore people, that we need to come around people, that we need to love people sacrificially. Paul talks about the fact that when somebody sins and somebody stumbles, that those that are strong in the faith should surround that person and restore them gently. So we need to be careful with our words and with our posture to not isolate people, but rather bring them in. We don't want to ignore what's going on. We don't want to affirm what's going on, but we don't want to push them away so that the very thing that God wants to use to heal them would be unavailable. We want to bring them in, to bring them into community and allow God to work His healing in their life. Which means you have to show up. For those of us that aren't suffering with this, we have to show up. Some consistency in that area to help them stop the cycle. Another thing is, for those that are struggling with addictions, you don't have to struggle in silence. Get help. For those that are struggling with mental health issues, you don't have to suffer in silence. Get help. It is not bad for you to go to somebody, to go to a doctor and get medication. It's not bad for you to go to a doctor and talk through some of this stuff with them. Get some help. Talk to somebody. Don't suffer in silence. Don't suffer alone. It's amazing to me with the mental health issue side of things. It's amazing to us that if you have the flu or if you have a cold or something, you go to the doctor. But if you have mental health issues, a lot of people say, well, just pray it. Trust God. It'll be fine. Sometimes it's not. You need to go get help. You need to talk to somebody. So I'm encouraging you. Find someone to talk to. Find someone to journey with. Because isolation kills. And the last thing in 2 Timothy, Paul admonishes Timothy. He pleads with Timothy and all of us, flee from sin. And a lot of times we don't flee from it, we flirt with it. We say, how close can I get and still not fall into this? It's amazing. Peter talked about this a little bit, and a lot of other addicts that I've talked to have said the same thing. It's amazing what you will do to rationalize your circumstance. How you'll rationalize things. It's not as bad as I thought it was. I can just do a little bit and it'll be okay. And you flirt with the edge. You flirt with the sin. And all of us that struggle with habitual sin in our life, we do the same thing. It's not that bad. And before you know it, the line that you swore you'd never cross is a mile that way. What does it look like for us to flee from the sin? Rick Warren says this: instead of trying to face some of your temptation, maybe at first you should probably flee from the temptation. And so when you have the first thought, as Peter was talking about, it's such a key principle. It's so wonderful. That first thought, lot of times we respond to, and that's what we're going to do because it feels right. That's that self-centeredness that we all deal with it with our sinful nature. It's that second good thought, the right thought. Search for that. So find somebody to talk to, somebody that you can confess to. The Bible says that we should confess our sins one to another and pray for one another so that we may be healed. You want to be healed of some of this stuff? Maybe you need to find somebody that you can confess this stuff to. Pray for one another and watch God do a work in your life. Those are just some tools that we can put into place in our life. Again, it's not a magic formula. For a lot of people, it doesn't happen overnight. But God in His grace, love, and patience will walk you through the process, and there is hope out of the chaos. There is hope. There is a way out. It doesn't have to be this way anymore. It's going to be hard sometimes. But if you put the right people around you, you'll make it through. Because He loves you. And He's a good God. He's a loving Father.